What if the world's darkest mysteries, those that haunted generations, baffled experts, and sparked endless conspiracy theories, actually had answers? From ghost ships found with dinner still warm on the table to two men who died wearing lead masks and waiting for a signal from the unknown, these chilling cases were once thought to be beyond explanation. But the truth? It's far more terrifying than any theory. These are 5 solved historical mysteries that are still feared today. Welcome to Unsolved Archives, where we delve into the hidden, the mysterious, and the unanswered. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight could be the key to unlocking the truth. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, the wind that screamed death. In the bleak winter of 1959, 9 Soviet hikers, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, set out to conquer the icy slopes of the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. All were young, fit, and experienced mountaineers. Their goal was a route through the pass near the ominously named Dead Mountain, Kholat Syakhl in the Mansi language. But what began as an ordinary expedition soon unraveled into one of the most disturbing mysteries of the 20th century. The group never returned. For weeks, nothing was heard from them. It was only when relatives raised concerns that a search party was dispatched. On February 26, their tent was discovered, half buried in snow and slashed open from the inside. Even more chilling, all of the group's belongings, including warm clothing, boots, and survival gear, remained untouched inside. The hikers had fled into the freezing night with little more than underwear and socks. One by one, searchers found bodies scattered in a bizarre pattern down the slope of the mountain. 2 were found under a cedar tree, barefoot, with burns on their hands, as if they had tried desperately to build a fire. 3 more lay between the tree and the tent, apparently frozen mid-run. It would be 2 months before the final 4 were discovered, buried under meters of snow in a nearby ravine. These last victims bore gruesome injuries. One had her tongue and eyes missing, another had shattered ribs and a crushed skull, yet with no visible external wounds. Theories swirled like a blizzard. Some pointed fingers at Soviet military testing. Was it a secret weapon gone wrong? Others believed it was an encounter with a Yeti or an alien force. Still others invoked local indigenous Mansi spirits, angered by the hikers' presence on sacred ground. Autopsy reports only deepened the confusion. No alcohol or drugs were found in their systems. Their injuries were violent, but without the trauma one would expect from combat or an animal attack. Radiation was found on some clothing. Photographs recovered from the group's cameras revealed nothing, except the haunting final image, a blurry, white-lit frame pointing toward the woods. The Soviet government closed the case quickly, concluding only that a compelling natural force was to blame. For decades, conspiracy theories flourished. Then, in 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, the Russian government reopened the investigation. But this time, there were no mentions of the supernatural or the secret military. Instead, they turned to science. A theory emerged that had long been dismissed but now held new credibility: a slab avalanche. Unlike traditional avalanches, slab avalanches occur when a cohesive layer of snow breaks off beneath the surface, often with little warning. Crucially, it leaves few traces once it stops. In 2020, a team of researchers from Switzerland and Russia used 3D simulations and forensic modeling to test this hypothesis. They found that under the right conditions, specifically, the snow buildup on a relatively shallow slope, combined with strong katabatic winds and the hikers digging of a trench into the snowpack to set up their tent, a slab avalanche could have occurred late at night, silently, and with devastating force. The pressure would have been enough to cause internal injuries like crushed ribs and skull fractures. In panic, the hikers slashed their way out of the collapsing tent and fled into the brutal -30°C winds in disoriented chaos. Some likely froze within minutes. Others tried to climb trees for shelter. The gruesome post-mortem damage, like missing eyes and tongue, was most likely caused by scavenging animals and the effects of decomposition in extreme cold. It wasn't a secret weapon, or a monster, or the wrath of spirits. It was nature, terrifying, silent, and merciless. Still, not everyone buys this explanation. For many, the Dyatlov Pass incident retains its aura of chilling uncertainty, like a wound in history that refuses to close. The snow has long covered their footprints, but the shadow of that night lingers. Sometimes, the most terrifying truths are the ones that erase every trace of mystery and leave us only with silence. The Mary Celeste, a ghost ship adrift in silence. On the cold morning of December 5, 1872, the British brig Dei Grazia was making her way through the choppy Atlantic waters some 400 miles east of the Azores when her crew spotted a ship adrift. The vessel was eerily still, its sails partially set but flapping loosely in the wind. There was no distress signal, no sign of damage, no crew on deck. It was the Mary Celeste. A boarding party from the Dei Grazia rowed over, calling out to the silent vessel. No response. They climbed aboard, and what they found has haunted maritime history ever since. The Mary Celeste was in perfectly seaworthy condition. Her cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was intact, with only 9 barrels slightly damaged. The galley still held a warm meal half-eaten. The ship's log had been updated just 9 days prior. The crew's personal items remained in their quarters. Yet every soul on board, 10 people, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, was gone. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting an intentional departure. But why would a seasoned captain abandon a ship in such stable condition and favorable weather? Even stranger, there was no evidence of violence or piracy. No blood. No signs of struggle. The ship's cargo and valuables were untouched. As the Mary Celeste was towed back to Gibraltar, word of the mystery spread like wildfire. The British Admiralty launched an inquest. Suspicions turned to the Dei Grazia. Had its crew killed those aboard the Mary Celeste and tried to claim salvage? The evidence, however, didn't support that theory. Others proposed bizarre explanations: a sea monster, a giant squid, a waterspout, or even an alien abduction. Some claimed Captain Briggs had gone mad and murdered everyone before vanishing himself. Spiritualists insisted the ship was cursed. The logs offered only a few clues. On November 25, the ship had encountered rough weather, and the last entry was dated November 25 near the Azores. Theories continued to mount. Perhaps fumes from the alcohol had leaked, causing fear of an explosion? Some believed the crew might have temporarily evacuated to escape danger, only to be lost at sea when the wind changed or the lifeboat capsized. The mystery persisted for over a century. The ship itself was sold and passed between owners, gaining a reputation as cursed. It ran aground off Haiti in 1885, under suspicious circumstances involving insurance fraud, and was ultimately destroyed. Then, in the early 2000s, forensic scientists and maritime historians revisited the case using modern technology. They focused on the ship's cargo, raw industrial alcohol, a highly volatile substance. Researchers concluded that some of the barrels had been leaking vapor. This would have built up beneath the deck in the hull. Any small spark, perhaps from friction or even a pipe, could have caused a low-pressure explosion, a pressure wave that would ignite and vanish without leaving scorch marks, but loud and violent enough to terrify everyone aboard. Panicked, Captain Briggs may have ordered an emergency evacuation, fearing the ship might explode. Taking to the lifeboat with his family and crew, he likely intended to trail behind until it was safe to return. But a sudden squall, or simple bad luck, could have separated them from the Mary Celeste. In rough seas, even a seasoned crew in a lifeboat could vanish without a trace. In this light, the abandonment was not madness, but a fatal misjudgment, one made in the name of caution. A rational decision in a moment of crisis, followed by a tragic accident. The ghost ship, then, wasn't cursed or haunted. It was simply empty, adrift in the vast silence of the Atlantic, waiting for someone to find it. A lonely monument to fear, fate, and the thin line between survival and doom at sea. What made the case so chilling wasn't the supernatural. It was the mundane horror of human error, set against the unforgiving backdrop of the open ocean. To this day, no bodies from the Mary Celeste have ever been found. The lead masks case. Messages from the Afterlife. On the afternoon of August 20, 1966, a young boy flying a kite on Morro do Vintum, a steep hill outside the Brazilian city of Niterói, stumbled upon a horrifying sight nestled in the underbrush. Two male bodies lay side by side in the grass, partially covered in leaves. Each was dressed in a formal suit and raincoat. Most bizarre of all, they wore lead-eye masks, the kind used to shield eyes from radiation. The police arrived quickly. What they found deepened the mystery. There were no signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no blood. Near the bodies was a notebook filled with bizarre instructions written in Portuguese. Be at the specified location at 16:30. Take capsules at 18:30. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal. Also found were an empty water bottle, 2 soaked towels, and a packet that once held tablets, though no toxic substances were found in the men's bodies during autopsy. Neither showed any sign of illness or poisoning. The deceased were identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz, 2 electronics repairmen from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. They had left their families a few days prior, saying they were traveling to buy materials for work. Witnesses reported seeing them at a local bar, where one appeared nervous, checking his watch frequently. He allegedly asked for water, complaining of a headache. But the trail went cold. Who had they planned to meet? What signal were they waiting for? Why the masks? Theories sprang up like weeds. Some suggested the two were victims of a botched scam involving radioactive materials. Others thought it was a secretive religious ritual, or even suicide fueled by psychosis. But what made the case truly disturbing was its aura of ritualistic intent. The men clearly expected something to happen, and their precise instructions implied a structured plan. Digging deeper, investigators discovered the two men had been heavily involved in a fringe spiritualist movement. They were part of a group that believed in communicating with extraterrestrial beings and spirits through energy experiments, and had reportedly attempted similar contact rituals in the past. Friends described how they would build strange electronic devices in secret, including one alleged spirit radio. Theories turned darker. Perhaps the men had attempted to initiate contact with non-human intelligence through some kind of psychic enhancement. The capsules could have been a form of LSD or another hallucinogen. But no trace of such drugs was detected, though the bodies were too decomposed to rule it out entirely. The lead masks added a disturbing flair. In some experimental metaphysical circles of the time, shielding one's eyes from bright lights, whether literal or spiritual, was believed to protect from psychic harm. The masks might have been part of a ritual to prevent blindness during a visionary encounter. As the press ran wild with stories of UFO cults and secret societies, the case quickly earned its nickname, the lead masks case. The public's imagination was gripped by the idea of two men climbing a hill to commune with another realm, and never coming back. But the official investigation came to no definitive conclusion. Without clear cause of death or toxicology evidence, police could only speculate. No third party was ever identified. No signal ever came. Decades passed. In 1990, a retired detective from the original investigation revisited the evidence. He uncovered previously unexamined witness accounts suggesting a third man had accompanied Viana and Cruz to the hill, possibly a spiritualist leader or guide. This individual was never found. Others believe the pair fell victim to a misguided attempt to reach higher consciousness, driven by pseudoscientific beliefs and the influence of a cult-like mentor. But with no forensic evidence or living witnesses, the truth remained elusive. To this day, the lead masks case sits at the uncomfortable intersection of science, faith, and paranoia. It's not just the deaths that disturb, it's the eerie calm of the scene, the sense of preparation, and the chilling feeling that they were waiting for something they truly believed in. The real horror may be that they weren't murdered. They chose to go. The London Burkers, death for sale in the shadows. In the foggy alleys of 1831 London, beneath the clamor of horse hooves and market cries, a sinister trade flourished, hidden from sight, but fueled by the very institutions meant to save lives. It was a time of scientific revolution. Medical schools were growing. Surgeons demanded fresh cadavers to study anatomy. But the British law permitted only the bodies of executed criminals to be dissected. The result: a grim underground market, body snatching. These resurrection men prowled graveyards by night, digging up the freshly buried to sell them to surgeons under the table. But in the slums of East London, a group emerged who went even further. They weren't digging up the dead. They were creating them. Their names were John Bishop, Thomas Williams, and James May, men with modest backgrounds and no formal criminal records. But in secret, they became the London Burkers, named after the infamous Burke and Hare of Edinburgh who had murdered to supply cadavers just a few years earlier. The Burkers realized that fresh, undamaged bodies fetched a premium price. Rather than wait for corpses, they lured society's most vulnerable, orphans, beggars, and the mentally ill, into their trap. Their method was chillingly efficient. They would get their victim drunk, then drown them, usually in a well at Bishop's home. Drowning left no visible marks, making the cause of death difficult to detect. The body would be sold within hours, while still warm. For a while, they evaded suspicion. London's chaotic sprawl, lack of forensic tools, and desperate need for cadavers allowed them to operate in the shadows. But in November 1831, they made a mistake. They murdered a 14-year-old boy named Carlo Ferrari, an Italian street performer with a trained pet mouse. His small size, foreign origin, and shy demeanor made him an easy target. But when they tried to sell his body to the King's College Anatomy Department, the surgeons grew suspicious. The boy's corpse was unusually fresh. There were signs of bruising. Most of all, he was simply too healthy to have died naturally. The surgeons stalled the sale and quietly contacted the authorities. Bishop, Williams, and May were arrested the same day. Investigators soon uncovered the well where many of the victims had been drowned. A shovel, blood-stained clothing. The quiet horror of serial murder hiding beneath the daily bustle of London life. At trial, the Burkers confessed to at least 3 murders, but authorities suspected the real number was far higher, possibly in the dozens. Bishop, attempting to spare his accomplices, claimed full responsibility. "I was driven by necessity," he said, "not by cruelty." His words did little to ease the public's fury. Both Bishop and Williams were hanged in front of a massive crowd outside Newgate Prison in December 1831. Ironically, their own bodies were dissected and displayed for medical study, the very fate they had imposed on their victims. The case horrified the public. It revealed not only the depravity of the killers, but also the dark underbelly of medical advancement. How science, when fueled by desperation and unchecked demand, could create a market for murder. The scandal was so great that it forced Parliament to act. In 1832, the Anatomy Act was passed, allowing doctors and students legal access to unclaimed bodies, mostly from hospitals and workhouses, thus ending the era of grave robbing and reducing the incentive for such crimes. But the legacy of the London Burkers remains as a macabre warning. When death becomes a commodity, some will find ways to profit, no matter the human cost. The Taman Shud case, the cipher of a dead man. At dawn on December 1, 1948, a man's body was discovered slumped against a seawall on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. He was well dressed in a crisp suit and polished shoes, lying peacefully as if asleep. But he was dead. The man had no wallet. No ID. Not a single label remained on his clothing. They had all been deliberately removed. In his pocket was an unused train ticket, a bus stub, and a peculiar scrap of paper, tightly rolled and hidden in a tiny fob pocket. It bore only 2 words. Tamam Shud. It was Persian, meaning ended or finished. The phrase appears at the end of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of existential poetry dealing with life's brevity and the inevitability of death. The choice of message and its concealment immediately deepened the mystery. Authorities were baffled. The man had no injuries. Toxicology revealed no poisons, though experts suspected a fast-acting toxin that left no trace. No one recognized him. He did not match any missing persons reports. Dental records and fingerprints yielded nothing. The press dubbed it the Taman Shud case. 6 weeks later, a breakthrough. A local man reported that just after the body was found, he discovered a strange item tossed in the back seat of his unlocked car, a copy of the Rubaiyat. Inside the book was a torn section, a perfect match to the Taman Shud slip. Even more astonishing, scrawled on the book's back page was a series of jumbled letters, what appeared to be a code. And under the code, a phone number. The number led police to Jessica Thompson, a nurse who lived near where the body was found. When shown a plaster bust of the man's face, Jessica nearly fainted. But she claimed not to know him. Yet there were whispers. Her behavior was evasive. The book had originally belonged to her, and she had given it to a man named Alf Boxall years earlier. Could the dead man be Boxall? No. Boxall was alive and well. His copy of the Rubaiyat was intact. Investigators speculated wildly. Was the man a spy? The Cold War was heating up, and nearby Adelaide hosted secretive military research facilities. The strange code, the poison with no trace, the connection to a woman who may have lied, these were all classic spycraft signatures. But no concrete link was ever proven. The cipher, when examined by naval codebreakers, was deemed unbreakable without a key. It may have been nothing more than a poetic musing, or it could have been a message only one person was meant to understand. The man was buried in 1949 under a simple marker, "Here lies the unknown man." Over the decades, amateur sleuths and professionals alike attempted to solve the case, but all trails ran cold. Then, in 2022, after more than 70 years, science finally spoke. Forensic researchers, using cutting-edge DNA extraction from hairs preserved in the plaster death mask, built a genetic profile of the unknown man. Cross-referencing with public genealogy databases, they identified him as Carl Charles Webb, a Melbourne-born electrical engineer and instrument maker, born in 1905. Carl had no known criminal record. He was never reported missing. But family history revealed personal tragedy, a failing marriage, mental health struggles, and financial ruin. His movements in the years prior to his death were untraceable. It's believed he traveled to Adelaide, possibly to find his estranged wife, who coincidentally lived near Jessica Thompson. The message in his pocket? Possibly a farewell. The book. A memento. The code. Still unsolved, but may have been a personal encryption or mental exercise, never meant for decoding. As for his cause of death, the answer remains elusive. Suicide by rare poison is still the leading theory, perhaps digitalis or strophanthine, compounds known to be virtually undetectable at the time. In the end, there were no assassins. No Cold War espionage. Just a man lost to the world, leaving behind a puzzle that would outlive him by decades. But even with a name, some mysteries endure. Why did he travel so far from home with no identification? What was his true connection to Jessica Thompson? Was his death truly voluntary, or was it staged? Perhaps those answers died with him on Somerton Beach, beneath the rising sun, with a final, whispered verse. Taman Shud. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?